But then how about the other side? Because when we talk about the causes of the Cold War, we always talk about how aggressive were the USSR, especially for the USSR leaders, for example, Stalin, for example, Lenin, how they try to expand the communism around the world, how they try to expand their sphere of influence, right? So how about US? Did they do anything to expand their influence, or for their defense, or for them to gain some territories? So I have a paragraph for you to read here. This is from a book, The Origins of the Cold War. So let's read together. The dynamics of the Cold War are easier to comprehend when one grasps the breadth of the American conception of national security that had emerged between 1945 and 1948. Actually, this right after or at the end, at the last stage of the Second World War to 1948. This conception includes a strategic, which is a military and political sphere of influence within the Western Hemisphere, domination of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and extensive system of outlying bases to enlarge the strategic frontier and project American power, and even more extensive system of transit rights to facilitate the conversion of commercial air bases to military use, access to resources and markets of Eurasia, denial of these resources to a prospective enemy, and the maintenance of nuclear superiority. But this maintenance, of course, is secretly. They were not really sharing the technology, right? So you can see from this paragraph, actually it was talking about America, about their diplomatic policy, about their military policy, right? So actually at the last year for the Second World War, they already started to build an extensive system of outlying bases to enlarge the strategic frontier. So maybe your question can be, it's already after the Second World War, right? Why they still need to build all these bases, outlying bases? And actually then they were not only trying to build these bases, actually they were having a extensive system. They were expanding their system, their protecting system, and even more extensive system, compared to the Second World War, even more extensive system of transit rights to facilitate the conversion of commercial air bases to military use. That means this is for military use, and also help them to access to different resources and markets in Eurasia. That means economically and militarily used, right? But you have to see one thing, that this is after the Second World War. It's not during the war. That means after the Second World War, they're still expanding their military system, expanding their different outlying bases, which is under the excuse of protecting their own country, right? So what happened to US after the Second World War? From that paragraph, actually it's obvious that they were expanding their sphere of influence. At the same time, they are building more and more military bases. Because after the war, I don't think any country is trying to threatening US about their power, especially before 1948, right? So actually, the turning point of their diplomatic policy and their military strategy was decided by Pearl Harbor incident in 1941. It's the time when Japan suddenly attacked them, and when they find out that all other countries actually is not that weak, actually can be very powerful, especially, for example, the Blitzkrieg of Germany, and for all the battleship, and also different naval power of Japan. So the US, they feel vulnerable to potential threats from the foreign power. So they started to, from 1943 to 44, US officials began to draw up plans for a chain of bases. That means a lot of bases, and they can connect each other with just like a chain, which would give the US control of both Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. That means both sides, right? Because they were in the middle of Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. This would also give US industrial access to the raw materials. That means not only for military use, also for the development of the country, for economic use, raw materials and markets of most Western Europe and Asia. And also after they built all these bases, chain of bases, both in around the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, this is a time when Stalin was alarmed in return. Of course, because they were the two superpowers after the Second World War, right? And one power actually they were expanding their military system. Of course, for the other, they were felt great threatened and alarmed. So the steps of the U.S. actually took to ensure its own security alarmed Stalin, and so created a spiral of distrust, which led ultimately to the Cold War. How USA can be aggressive, right? You may ask this thing. They always say that we support free trade, free market. We support decolonization. Of course, they need free trade and free market because all these people around the world, they should buy their products. But at all times, if you were colonies, actually you have to do what? You have to buy things from the country who colonized your country, right? But now, since we were having free trade, free market, of course, people around the world, they can feel free to buy US products. And also this is the same reason why they were supporting decolonization, because these countries, they can sell their cheap materials to me. No one is getting strong when they make use of these cheap materials to build their industry, and they can produce more things which will sell back to the world market, Eurasian market. And also, every time when we try to talk about how USSR, they were aggressive, you have to say at that time, for USSR, they still have some concern for themselves, and they feel like unsatisfied with all these Western powers. Even they belong to the Grand Alliance in the Second World War, and they want to cooperate with each other. Something make them suspicious. Firstly, the Allies delayed their counteroffensive. It's the time when Germany started to invade USSR. But even though USSR, they joined the Grand Alliance, still the help and the support and the materials provided by the Grand Alliance has delayed a lot, not until 1942, right? And when U.S. they use atomic bombs, the two atomic bombs in Japan, it's a time when other countries they find out they were having this like cutting edge technology, because they built this technology secretly without informing any other country or sharing the technology. So what was the spiral distrust between US and USSR? Actually, spiral of distrust is a psychology term. You can see when the relationship between two people or two groups or two countries here, it can develop from doubt to fear and self-protection. Self-protection is more of the time when they try to build some defensive system and do something aggressive, right? So firstly, they have doubts. Why? It's because they got different ideologies. Actually, they connect to the last class content, right? Is that any chance that we can get together? Maybe we are different. That's the reason why we can't get on well with each other, right? And then when Soviets they actively spread communism, they will feel maybe they don't want to be friends with me at all. So suspicious created because of these actions. And also at the same time when US intervened of Russian Civil War. This is like a chronological order. Firstly, they have different ideologies. Secondly, their confrontation in different events. And then anxiety, a chain of bases were built especially for US at this period of time, right? Because for USSR, they just want to defeat Germany. They just want to be a good partner with all other allies in the Second World War. But for US, on the other hand, they start to expand their military's protective system, right? A chain of bases were built which would give the US control of both the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. So for next class, we're going to talk about the inter-allied negotiations from 1941 to 1945. For this part, we're going to complete the spiral distrust to see how the fear and self-protection has changed their relationship and has changed their policies